June 6th, 2005. At this point in time, it marks 11 years ago. Today is June 6th, 2016. And I wish I had the words to really describe, how I feel. There's one word that comes to mind a lot of times when I'm trying to make people understand my mental state surrounding it, and that is stuck. I can smell June 6th. I can taste it. I can feel it. My body goes through this grieving process that's weird to me, but I can only imagine other people have experienced it, where I'm just there, but I'm here. When I think about being a mother now, I honestly can't remember if I ever wanted to be one. I don't remember talks with friends, family, my mom, even a boyfriend about being a mother. I actually had my first child at 17. I ended up getting pregnant with Caden and having him no more than a year after I had my first child. He was my high school sweetheart, and he broke up with me when I was like 15 years old. And when I came back from out of state, we started dealing back with each other, and that's where the baby came from. I got pregnant at a freaking rest stop. I remember we were on our way to, either on our way to or on our way back from Holly. He had family in Holly, and we were with his cousin, and I remember he drove a truck. I was so crazy in love over this boy that I had sex in a rest stop. And I know that's when I conceived. It was no doubt about it. However, finding out and trying to tell him, it was a bunch of denial. To me, that's kind of where all the emotional mess with this pregnancy, this child, and how the situation turned out, that's where it started. It started when I met this man when I was 13, 14 years old. In this summer between 8th grade and 9th grade, I was just going to high school. We dated at the end of 8th grade, and I was the girl who had the cute football player boyfriend who went to high school, and that's where it all started. And it has been an emotional roller coaster since I was 13. One thing I do remember too about the denial, it just wasn't on his part, it was on mine. I remember I have a slim build. I've been skinny all my life. It was a point in time before I became of age that I wasn't over 155 unless I was with child. So I remember we were in Mount Pleasant, and my uncle stayed with us, and I wanted to gain weight so bad. And my uncle was like, "Oh, just drink some Ensures, that'll help." So I'm buying them and guzzling them. I'm talking about just guzzling them. And I was working at the time, so I was just buying case after case after case. The only thing that was getting bigger was my freaking stomach. And I just would not accept. I'm like, no, I'm pregnant. I'm not pregnant again. No. I was pregnant again. When I was pregnant, I worked at Wendy's. It's my very first job. Absolutely hated it. I remember I used to have a grease spot, big old grease spot on the stomach part of my shirt. And I had to wear like a men's size shirt because my stomach was so big. When I took the time to let him know that I was pregnant, it wasn't a good response. I actually couldn't call him directly. He had me blocked. I had to have my best friend at the time get his number from his cousin, who she used to date, and then call him and relay the message. And if I recall right, I think probably said a few choice words and denied it and hung up. Didn't want to hear from me at all. Unfortunately, I was too immature mentally at the time to understand that us sleeping together after a little childhood teenage breakup really didn't mean anything. So when the denial of the baby came, it was a rejection that not only I wasn't ready for, but it brought me all the way back to 15, 16 years old all over again when he first broke up with me. And that's when the depression started. Second pregnancy was my most challenging. It was the first high-risk pregnancy. I had to have ultrasounds weekly. I would ride my bike to work, and I worked all the way until I was 8 months. And I would ride my bike to imaging to get my ultrasounds, and I did everything that I felt like I was supposed to do. I heard so many things from doctors about my body and my age and just all these factors. Overproduction of the female hormone, just a lot of things that I still go through even now, where every pregnancy since has been high risk. But he was my preemie that I delivered a month early, and he was only 4 pounds. I remember being big and feeling big. Still can't fathom how I had such a small child. But I was due September 11th of 2005. But he was born November 30th, 2004. Early in the morning. I remember they tried to stop my labor because of being preterm. But all the meds did was slow it down. So it was the shortest pregnancy I had, but the longest labor I've ever experienced. And I've always did all natural. So it was very painful. I was by myself. I remember my father and my son, my oldest son, was there. He was only 2, turning 2. Obviously, the father wasn't there. I had him, and then my birthday was a week later, and I just remember just being so sad. I was very sad. I was tired, and I was taken from Mount Pleasant to Saginaw because at the time, I'm not sure how different it is now, but they didn't have an ICU. So I had to go to Covenant because they had an NICU. And he ended up staying in the hospital after I was released, and that was probably, at the time, I thought one of the hardest things I had to deal with after having such a rough pregnancy. I was huge. Again, I was really big, and I made so much milk. And the one thing other than not being to term that made him technically premature and not ready to come home right away was because he was born without a sucking reflex. So here I am just dripping milk all over the place. And my baby couldn't suck worth nothing. He would lay there in that incubator with those big eyes and just stare at everybody, but wasn't trying to eat. So we had to teach him. We had to teach him how to suck so that he can come home. I named him Caden Luke. Caden means fighter, and Luke means bringer of light. I didn't really know how much he would live up to that name in such a short amount of time. But in the beginning, he definitely was a fighter. You wouldn't even have known that he was premature. I stayed my customary 3 days in the hospital, and when it was time for me to get discharged, it was a hard decision because I was nursing, and they ended up having some options for mothers who had children in the NICU, and I was offered a stay that my insurance could cover for a week. It was a little longer than what I guess is usual, but it was a closet-sized room that was on the same floor as the ICU. It was internal in the hospital, so it was no windows. It was just a bed and a nightstand. They did give you a key to lock up your belongings. There's a bathroom across the hall where I had to take bird baths to clean up in the morning or whenever. And I would go see Caden when I could. I remember not finding out until like the last 2 days that there was additional room that's kind of like a rec type room where it's a TV and magazines and a breast pump, and this whole time I'm just in the room that I was assigned to. But I would go see him and try to feed him and bond as much as possible, and I got to the point to where after all the tests were run and he was actually gaining a little bit of weight, we were both discharged a second time. It was about 5 to 7 days, so we ended up going home right around my birthday, which is December 5th. And it was overwhelming, but it was a good overwhelming feeling. I was very excited that nothing was wrong with him, and we had made it through, you know, our first week coming out strong and on top. I remember I had to stop breastfeeding. I think I was making way more than my body can really handle as far as me being able to keep up with the type of diet that I really needed to have to nurse successfully. I was young, really taking my body through a lot more very early, and as much as I read and tried to learn about the process, doing it was just very difficult for me. However, I made so much milk that there was so much stored in the freezer. I was able to carry us over until I came up with, you know, a different alternative for milk at the time. Soy was the big thing with formula, and it was supposed to be better. So, you know, over 10 years ago, soy wasn't a bad thing for us to digest, supposedly. And so that's the option that we took. And I remember he suffered from colic. He cried a lot. Nothing consoled him besides just being held. He wanted a lot of attention. I mean, I vividly remember visiting relatives, and just having to pass him around and hold him the whole time, no matter what it was that we were doing, in order for us to really enjoy his company and enjoy each other's company.